The rise of the Habsburgs. The Habsburgs began as an obscure noble family in 10th century Switzerland, named after Habsburg Castle. At first, their influence was limited to local regions far from the centers of European power. But they possessed a unique asset, a brilliant strategy of political marriages. For the Habsburgs, marriage was more than alliance building. It was a calculated tool for imperial expansion. Their fortunes shifted dramatically in 1477 when Maximilian I married Mary of Burgundy. This strategic union brought vast territories under Habsburg control and elevated their status among Europe's great powers. This marked the beginning of a remarkable ascent. By the early 1500s, they inherited the Spanish crown and its enormous overseas empire. Charles V, a product of both Austrian and Spanish Habsburg lines, ruled a global empire stretching from the Caribbean to the Philippines, establishing the Habsburgs as the first truly global dynasty. Their influence grew so powerfully that the phrase, "let others wage war." "You, happy Austria, Mary," came to define their bloodless conquest through matrimony. Despite this, by the 16th century, Habsburg rulers occupied almost every major throne in Europe, with a notable exception of France. Their rule became synonymous with the continent's politics and culture. While other monarchs waged war for territory, the Habsburgs built an empire with treaties, betrothals, and careful diplomacy. From 1438 to 1806, the Habsburgs dominated the Holy Roman Empire, maintaining almost unbroken control of the imperial title. The empire's decentralized structure suited their strengths: patient negotiation, marital alliances, and subtle manipulation. The Holy Roman Empire, made up of hundreds of semi-autonomous territories, proved difficult to rule. Yet the Habsburgs thrived within this complexity, making the imperial crown practically their birthright. Charles V, perhaps the most remarkable of Habsburg emperors, ruled from 1519. He presided over a vast and diverse empire. Yet managing such a dominion proved overwhelming. To maintain control, Charles divided the Habsburg dynasty. The Spanish Habsburgs ruled Spain and its colonies, while the Austrian branch focused on Central Europe and the Holy Roman Empire. This split reshaped European politics for generations. Ruling the Holy Roman Empire remained a challenge. It lacked centralized authority. The emperor needed the cooperation of powerful electors and princes who jealously guarded their independence. The Peace of Augsburg in 1555 introduced the principle of cuius regio, ius religio, allowing local rulers to choose between Catholicism and Lutheranism for their territories. Though it temporarily calmed tensions, it deepened divisions and laid the groundwork for future conflicts. Vienna became the heart of Habsburg power. The city stood as a Catholic stronghold as Protestant reform swept Europe. Aligning themselves closely with Catholicism, the Habsburgs gained support from Rome but alienated many Protestant regions. This religious alignment further defined their political and ideological identity. Despite criticism from figures like Voltaire, who mocked the Holy Roman Empire as neither holy, Roman, nor an empire, the Habsburgs transformed this chaotic confederation into a lasting platform for their rule. Their strength lay in quiet pragmatism, not brute force. While other dynasties crumbled from war or internal decay, the Habsburgs endured. Conflicts with the Ottoman Empire, the Habsburgs on the edge of Europe. During the early modern period, Central and Southeastern Europe became a battleground for dominance between two of history's most powerful dynasties, the Christian Habsburgs and the Islamic Ottomans. This rivalry extended far beyond borders. It was a civilizational clash that would shape European identity and redefine the political landscape of the continent for centuries. The tension began intensifying after the fall of Constantinople in 1453, when the Ottomans captured the former Byzantine capital. The shock of this event rippled through Christian Europe, marking the rise of a formidable Islamic empire on its eastern frontier. In the decades that followed, the Ottomans swept through the Balkans, bringing nearly the entire region under their control. Their advance brought them directly to the doorstep of the Habsburg-controlled territories. At the heart of this emerging conflict was Hungary, a territory that became the buffer zone between the two empires. For the Habsburgs, defending Hungary meant more than preserving land. It was a matter of protecting Christian Europe itself. With a growing sense of religious and political urgency, the Habsburgs embraced their role as defenders of Christendom, pitting their fate against the seemingly unstoppable Ottoman tide. Vienna's escape was narrow, and the city remained constantly under threat. Lacking natural defenses, the Habsburg capital was vulnerable, and the dynasty shifted into a defensive stance that would define their military policy for generations. More than 150 years later, in 1683, the Ottomans returned with a vengeance. The Second Siege of Vienna was not merely a military maneuver. It was the empire's most ambitious campaign to date. The stakes could not have been higher. This time, however, Vienna would not stand alone. A Christian coalition led by the Polish king, John III Sobieski, arrived to lift the siege. On September 12, 1683, Sobieski led a legendary cavalry charge, one of the largest in history, that shattered the Ottoman forces and drove them back. This victory was more than just a military success. It was a symbolic triumph of Christian unity and resilience. Vienna became the emblem of Europe's resistance against Eastern expansion. The turning point at Vienna sparked a broader conflict known as the Great Turkish War, 1683 to 1699. Over the next 16 years, the Habsburgs led relentless campaigns to drive the Ottomans out of Hungary and the Balkans. These were brutal, slow-moving wars marked by sieges, disease, and hardship. But gradually, the momentum shifted in favor of the Habsburgs. The war culminated in the Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699, a defining moment in European history. The Ottomans formally ceded vast territories, including much of Hungary, to the Habsburgs. For the first time, the Ottoman Empire was permanently pushed back, and the Habsburgs emerged as undisputed regional powers. This victory reshaped the map of Central Europe and established Austria as a dominant force in continental politics. The Habsburgs had succeeded in turning back the Ottoman tide, a feat that further cemented their legacy as Europe's defenders. Yet amid the bloodshed, history also left behind cultural echoes. According to legend, as the Ottomans retreated from Vienna in 1683, they abandoned sacks of coffee beans. These beans, once roasted and brewed, helped give rise to Vienna's famous coffee house culture, a symbol of intellectual life and cosmopolitan charm that endures to this day. While romanticized, this myth adds a flavorful twist to an otherwise brutal episode in European warfare. The financial burden, however, was immense. These wars required enormous taxation and stretched the imperial treasury thin. Some regions within the empire, already dealing with famine and plague, teetered on collapse. Still, the Habsburgs persisted, their identity now entwined with the notion of a spiritual and cultural wall against the East. Over time, this vision became deeply embedded in the European imagination. The Habsburgs were seen not just as monarchs, but as guardians of Western civilization. Though their victories were hard-won and often costly, their ability to turn struggle into symbolic capital set them apart from many rivals. Their longevity owed as much to storytelling and perception as it did to battlefield success. As the Ottoman threat receded, the Habsburgs turned their focus inward to strengthen their empire. But the memory of the sieges, especially that of 1683, remained a rallying point for future generations. It symbolized resilience, unity, and the high cost of peace. In the end, the centuries-long rivalry with the Ottomans shaped the Habsburg Empire in ways both tangible and mythic. The military victories, cultural legends, and political narratives forged during these wars helped solidify the dynasty's identity, one built not just on royal bloodlines and clever marriages, but on resistance, perseverance, and a powerful sense of destiny. The War of Austrian Succession and the rise of Maria Theresa. In 1740, the death of Emperor Charles VI marked a pivotal turning point in European history. Though he had spent years crafting the Pragmatic Sanction, a decree meant to secure the succession of his daughter, Maria Theresa, and preserve the Habsburg Empire. The ink was barely dry before Europe's great powers began plotting. Despite agreeing to the decree during his lifetime, many rulers now saw an opportunity to challenge Habsburg authority under a young and inexperienced female monarch. This opportunism ignited what became an 8-year conflict known as the War of Austrian Succession, 1740 to 1748, a war that would define the early reign of Maria Theresa and reshape Europe's political order. At the heart of the storm was Frederick II of Prussia, later known as Frederick the Great. Just 2 months after Charles VI's death, the 28-year-old king invaded Silesia, a wealthy and strategically vital Habsburg province. His swift aggression was both a test of Maria Theresa's resolve and a bold move to expand Prussia's influence. The capture of Silesia didn't just destabilize Austria. It disrupted the fragile balance of power across the continent. What followed was a tangled web of shifting alliances and deepening rivalries. France, Spain, and Bavaria aligned with Prussia, while Britain and the Dutch Republic sided with Austria, concerned about maintaining the European equilibrium. The war quickly escalated beyond a dispute over succession, evolving into a broader struggle for territorial and political dominance. Despite her efforts, the Prussian army, under Frederick's brilliant command, won several key battles, most notably the Battle of Mollwitz in 1741. These victories solidified Prussia's control over Silesia, a blow Maria Theresa never truly accepted. By 1748, both sides were exhausted. The war ended with the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle, which confirmed Prussia's hold on Silesia. For Maria Theresa, the loss was both a political and personal defeat. Yet the end of hostilities did not mean the end of conflict. The war had left deep scars and unresolved tensions between Austria and Prussia, setting the stage for future struggles. Still, Maria Theresa had emerged stronger, not just as a monarch who survived war, but as a reformer ready to reshape her empire. In the years following the war, Maria Theresa embarked on an ambitious campaign to modernize Austria. She restructured the military, improving training, command structure, and readiness. Recognizing the financial strain the war had exposed, she also introduced tax reforms, reducing dependence on feudal dues and expanding the tax base to include previously exempt nobles. Her reforms went deeper than economics or military affairs. Determined to reduce the power of the aristocracy, she centralized administration, creating a more efficient and bureaucratic government. These changes laid the foundation for a stronger, more unified Habsburg state. The formation of the Austrian Empire, 1804. In 1804, a pivotal decision by Francis II reshaped the future of the Habsburg dynasty. In response to Napoleon Bonaparte crowning himself Emperor of the French, Francis declared a new imperial title for himself, Francis I, Emperor of Austria. With that act, the Austrian Empire was born, officially consolidating the Habsburgs' hereditary lands under a single, centralized crown. This move was more than symbolic. It represented a strategic shift, away from the crumbling, outdated structure of the Holy Roman Empire and toward a modern imperial identity that could endure the growing turbulence of 19th-century Europe. The newly formed Austrian Empire unified a vast and diverse patchwork of territories: Austria, Hungary, Bohemia, and numerous smaller regions stretching across Central and Southeastern Europe. Unlike the decentralized Holy Roman Empire, this new entity sought administrative centralization, with more uniform laws and institutions under Vienna's control. It marked a decisive step toward strengthening Habsburg authority in the age of rising nationalism and centralized nation-states. However, the empire's diversity was both its greatest asset and its biggest challenge. The population was multi-ethnic and multilingual, including Hungarians, Czechs, Croats, Slovenes, Poles, Italians, and others, each group with its own language, culture, aspirations. Governing such a mosaic of identities demanded careful balancing between central control and regional autonomy, a delicate tightrope the Habsburgs would struggle to walk. When Napoleon forced the dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire in 1806, Francis had already secured his legacy through foresight. By creating a new empire beforehand, he preserved Habsburg prestige and authority, even as centuries-old institutions collapsed around him. But this transformation wasn't just about reacting to Napoleon. It reflected broader political and ideological shifts sweeping through Europe. The era of feudalism was ending, and centralized, modern states were becoming the new norm. By embracing this trend, Francis ensured the Habsburgs could remain relevant in a rapidly changing world. Still, the formation of the Austrian Empire exposed unresolved tensions. Efforts to centralize power often clashed with strong regional identities. The Hungarians, for instance, retained deep-rooted national pride and consistently resisted policies imposed from Vienna. Similarly, the Czechs of Bohemia wrestled with questions of loyalty, torn between cultural identity and imperial allegiance. These conflicts revealed the limits of centralization in a culturally fragmented empire. While the Habsburgs aimed to create a cohesive imperial structure, the underlying diversity of their lands often defied easy unification. The Austro-Prussian War and Austria's decline in Germany, 1866. In 1866, a long-standing rivalry between Austria and Prussia for dominance over the German-speaking world reached its breaking point. Though they had once cooperated, especially in the joint administration of Schleswig and Holstein, seized from Denmark, the cracks beneath the alliance were deep. Otto von Bismarck, Prussia's cunning chancellor, saw an opportunity to reshape German politics. Bismarck deliberately stoked tensions over the governance of the duchies, portraying Austria as an obstacle to German unity. His aim was clear: provoke a conflict that would allow Prussia to sideline Austria from German affairs once and for all. His strategy worked. By June 1866, tensions erupted into open war. Known as the Austro-Prussian War, or the 7 Weeks' War, it pitted Austria's larger but outdated army against a rapidly modernizing Prussian force. Under Bismarck and General Helmuth von Moltke, Prussia had revolutionized its military, introducing breech-loading rifles and leveraging railways to move troops with remarkable speed. Austria, still relying on traditional tactics and outdated weaponry, quickly found itself outmatched. The decisive blow came on July 3, 1866, at the Battle of Königgrätz, Zadova. Though Austria fielded a larger force, the Prussians outmaneuvered them with superior strategy, firepower, and coordination. The battle ended in a crushing defeat for Austria, with tens of thousands of casualties. It was a humiliating and symbolic end to centuries of Habsburg dominance in German politics. The Treaty of Prague, signed later in 1866, formally excluded Austria from the German Confederation. In its place, Bismarck created the North German Confederation, a political and military union led by Prussia. The stage was now set for full German unification, which would be completed in 1871 with the creation of the German Empire under Kaiser Wilhelm I. For Austria, the consequences were far-reaching. Its centuries-long role as a dominant German power had ended. The Habsburgs were forced to turn away from German affairs, redirecting their attention toward their increasingly unstable multi-ethnic empire to the east and south. Domestically, Austria's defeat triggered renewed demands for reform, especially from Hungary. Long dissatisfied with centralized Habsburg rule, Hungarian leaders saw Vienna's weakened position as a chance to negotiate greater autonomy. The result was the Austro-Hungarian Compromise of 1867. This agreement created the dual monarchy of Austria-Hungary, in which Austria and Hungary became co-equal partners. Each governed its own internal affairs, but shared a single monarch, foreign policy, and military. While it temporarily stabilized the empire, it also formalized its internal divisions, making future cohesion more difficult. Nationalism and ethnic tensions in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Austria-Hungary was a vast and diverse empire, where a multitude of ethnicities coexisted under the Habsburg crown. Germans, Hungarians, Czechs, Slovaks, Poles, Ukrainians, Croats, Serbs, Romanians, Italians, Slovenes, and others lived side by side, each group contributing to the empire's cultural richness. Yet this diversity, while a potential strength, became a source of constant tension. At the heart of the problem was unequal power distribution. German-speaking Austrians and ethnic Hungarians, Magyars, dominated political and economic life, while the majority populations were excluded from meaningful participation. The empire's leadership often failed to accommodate the growing demands for equality, autonomy, and cultural recognition from its minority groups. In Bohemia, Czech leaders pushed for equal status for their language and culture alongside German. Their appeals were largely rejected, stirring resentment. In Galicia, Poles demanded greater self-rule, while the Ukrainian minority, already marginalized, struggled for basic educational and linguistic rights. The Balkans were a particularly volatile region. South Slavic groups, notably Croats and Serbs, began to embrace a pan-Slavic identity, encouraged by the growing influence of Russia and the rising aspirations of an independent Serbia. For many, the dream was unity with fellow Slavs outside the empire, not continued subjugation under Vienna or Budapest. Nationalism and ethnic tensions in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Austria-Hungary was a vast and diverse empire, where a multitude of ethnicities coexisted under the Habsburg crown. Germans, Hungarians, Czechs, Slovaks, Poles, Ukrainians, Croats, Serbs, Romanians, Italians, Slovenes, and others lived side by side, each group contributing to the empire's cultural richness. Yet this diversity, while a potential strength, became a source of constant tension. At the heart of the problem was unequal power distribution. German-speaking Austrians and ethnic Hungarians, Magyars, dominated political and economic life, while the majority populations were excluded from meaningful participation. The empire's leadership often failed to accommodate the growing demands for equality, autonomy, and cultural recognition from its minority groups. In Bohemia, Czech leaders pushed for equal status for their language and culture alongside German. Their appeals were largely rejected, stirring resentment. In Galicia, Poles demanded greater self-rule, while the Ukrainian minority, already marginalized, struggled for basic educational and linguistic rights. The Balkans were a particularly volatile region. South Slavic groups, notably Croats and Serbs, began to embrace a pan-Slavic identity, encouraged by the growing influence of Russia and the rising aspirations of an independent Serbia. For many, the dream was unity with fellow Slavs outside the empire, not continued subjugation under Vienna or Budapest. These linguistic policies deepened ethnic divides and even caused friction between Austria and Hungary themselves, as they prioritized different approaches to maintaining control. The imperial parliament, meant to unify voices, instead became a symbol of dysfunction. Delegates often argued in more than 10 languages. In one infamous instance, a single debate dragged on for 3 days due to translation issues, as representatives refused to agree on a common language. Amid this chaos, Pan-Slavism continued to gain strength. This ideology, rooted in shared Slavic identity and backed by Russian support, advocated for the unification of Slavic peoples and the end of Germanic and Hungarian dominance. In regions like Bosnia and Croatia, many Slavs began to see the empire not as a protector, but as an oppressor. By the early 20th century, nationalism was no longer a series of scattered uprisings. It had become a systemic threat. The Habsburgs, unwilling to implement real reform, clung to centralization, fearing that granting autonomy to one group would spark similar demands across the empire. This resistance to change only intensified the internal divisions. The cracks were no longer superficial. They were deep fractures. And while the collapse of the empire would not come overnight, it was nationalism, festering within and fueled from beyond, that would ultimately tear it apart.